I've been asked to give a talk on my call to work amongst the Albanian people, or for the Albanian people, and that is what this talk is about. So we begin with me at about the age of 16 in 1963, and there you see me, and that was about the time I was converted and came to faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. I've put here on the slide that that's the church through which I was converted. It is the first church I willingly attended. It's in Basingstoke. It's not there now anymore. It's been demolished. But before I actually came to faith, I in fact moved to another Methodist church that was nearer to my home, on the housing estate known as Southam. Now, after I came to faith, I began to read about early Methodism. I began to enjoy Wesley's hymns. I began to mingle with evangelical people. And so I took these people as my role models for life. There's John Wesley on the left, and in the middle you see Hugh Bourne, and on the right William Clowes, nobody quite knows how to say it, and they were the founders of primitive Methodism, so they became my role model. I very quickly began to want to live for the gospel, and here I am in my early preaching days, standing outside Rotherwick Methodist Church, and I put that hymn there because it expresses my desire, my talents, gifts, and graces, Lord, into thy blessed hands receive. And let me live to preach thy word, and let me to thy glory live, my every sacred moment spend in publishing the sinner's friend. Well, I was born and grew up in Basingstoke, and my departure from Basingstoke began in February 1965 when I went to BACKNANG, which is in Germany, to work as a postman. And there you see me with my postman's jacket on. The purpose, of course, was to improve my German, as I was going to study German and French at the university. So I went to live in BACKNANG, and there I spent about 2.5 months and another couple of weeks in Llay am Rhein after that. I was already a Christian, as I've said, and I was looking for a church. I went to visit the Pentecostal pastor, but I didn't get invited in. His wife answered not the door, but leant out of a window in a block of flats, didn't invite me in. I went round the corner and there was Zion Methodist Church, which you see in the photograph. So I went to the Methodist Church, and there was a family, you see a picture of them there, called Preisler, and they had escaped from Eastern Germany, Thüringen in fact, a place called Siegenrück. And they had escaped from there after the war, and they invited me to live with them. So I went to live with a family from communist Europe, and through them and through other people in the church and through the youth group, which met interdenominationally in the town, I began to hear a lot about Eastern Europe and what it was like for Christians in Eastern Europe. I also met people who were elderly and therefore allowed out on visits, and they would be visiting in homes where I was invited for perhaps a meal or some other visit. So BACKNANG was very fundamental, formative in my call, not to Albania to start with, but to Eastern Europe. And we see here the providence of God, because I was also offered a job in Düsseldorf, but I decided to go to BACKNANG. Well, as part of my desire to be a good primitive Methodist, I began preaching, as you've already seen. I also did some open-air preaching. There I am with a group of students preaching to people gathered at the Mill, as it's called, in Cambridge in 1966. That wasn't the only place where we did open-air preaching. And in 1966, I also went to Vienna to work at a hotel, but that didn't last, and I joined Operation Mobilization and worked with them for a while. I was in Vienna for a couple of months. Now, Vienna was the centre at that time for people who were engaged in various forms of ministry for Eastern Europe. And one of the things we used to do in the evening was go looking for cars from Eastern Europe and put tracts on their windscreens. The police came and wondered what we were doing with our literature once when we were unloading it. And so there was that tension and that fear. And I got into my own heart something of the feeling which Christianity in Eastern Europe generated at that time. Well, I went to university and I studied French and German and other things in those years, 1965 to 1968. And then I graduated. I am with my tutor, Dr. Robson, and I had no idea what to do. I wanted to live for the gospel, but I had no clear sense of guidance, no obvious next step. So I drifted into school teaching. I've called that a foolish mistake because I'm an only child and I don't easily relate to children, nor do they relate to me. And I did my best, but I wasn't a marked success. But anyway, that's what I did, and one of the schools I taught at in my first year was Maidstone Technical High School for Girls, which needed a part-time French and German teacher just for one term. Now, one of the pupils came to faith. After I'd left the school, I moved on to teach in Ramsgate. We started a Christian Union, one of the other teachers and I, and it was through the Christian Union that she was converted after I had left. And she wrote to me, telling me, I expect you have heard of the wonderful thing that happened about 6 weeks ago. I am beginning to realise more than ever just how much Christ has done for me. So she wrote that letter in early 1969, probably in the first 3 months or so. So during this time, I'm praying for Eastern Europe, particularly from 1972. I stepped up my praying for it, began to focus on Eastern Europe. I was preaching in churches, sometimes 3 times a Sunday, but I still had no clear long-term ministry opening up before me and developing as what was obviously the call and will of God for my life's service. Nonetheless, 2 certainties did begin to form. One was that God had a very definite purpose for me. Take heed now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it. And the other certainty that developed was that this girl who had been converted was going to be my wife one day. And here we are in 72 visiting Epworth. What better place to visit than John Wesley's birthplace? There were more significant events during the course of that year, 1973. It was a very significant year in the unfolding of my life. One is that I became an accredited minister. That is the church in Borough Green, where I was a member, And my wife, as my wife-to-be, was a member of the Strict Baptist Chapel in Borough Green, and I was recognised in 1973 as a minister in that denomination. And also at the chapel, we were married on the 28th of July 1973. So that was a very significant year. My interest in Eastern Europe needed to be narrowed down. It was not possible really to pray. Margaret and I used to kneel on the floor by a settee and pray for Eastern Europe and Russia, country by country, but it was far too big for us to cope with in our prayer lives. So I began to wonder, and no doubt also to pray, how it should be narrowed down. Now, of course, Albania was the hardest communist regime in Europe. It was the only mainly Muslim country in Europe, and by then it was claiming to be the world's first atheistic state, and therefore it very much attracted my attention. So we narrowed down our interest to the Albanian people, and as Albania was closed, we went in 1974 in our little white Renault 4 from Kent, where we were living, to Montenegro and to Kosovo, the Albanian part, of course, of Montenegro, down in the south. And there you can see what is known as the Accursed Mountains at a place called Gutsy. And there I had a very strong word from the Lord. Before we left, a brother had given a prophecy. We were amongst Pentecostal people at the time as well, or charismatic people, shall we say. You will go as far as you can, and there, when you can go no further, God will give you a vision of your future work. And Margaret was talking to somebody else we'd met at the camping site, and so I said, I'm going for a walk. And I was just walking along a track in the direction of these mountains, and my sandal strap snapped, and I could go no further, exactly as the prophecy had said. And I looked at those mountains, and beyond those lies Albania. This was a confirmation of the direction that my thoughts were going. That's the little house that we lived in, the one on the left. And we called a prayer meeting in October 1976, made it known in the Christian press that we would pray for Albania. There would be a prayer meeting for Albania. And I think there were 10 people who gathered that day, and we prayed for Albania. And that was the beginning of a prayer movement for Albania that I was aware of, and it began to grow and to spread. First of all, people were coming from the other side of London, so we started to meet in different places so that not everybody would have to cross through London every time, and people began to meet in other places around Britain as well. In 1977, Margaret and I were asked to deliver materials to Vienna, and we went in that camper van that was lent to us. And that's Lucy, our daughter. And we wanted to visit the European Christian Mission because they already had some involvement with Albanian work. And I was hoping that through contact with ECM, my own ministry would be accepted and developed. So we went, but they were very, very cagey. So I was really not drawn in. Then in 1977, we moved to Wales. And without realising really what we were doing, we continued to lay the foundations of the Albanian Evangelical Mission that was later to be formed. We often had guests in our home, mainly young men, and they were interested in Albania. And they would come and spend perhaps the weekend, a night or two, and I would take them walking in the mountains, and we would talk and pray and plan and share ideas and share thoughts. And Margaret fed them. there she is with some of the bread that she made, and I might say she still has a skill at bread making. So networking without realizing that it was going to lead to the formation of a mission. The prayer movement grew. In 1979, we had a weekend conference for prayer. It didn't meet afterwards until 1983, and then it carried on. And so there's the group that gathered for a weekend of prayer and information and sharing concerning Albania, one of the years. Now, during those years, 1979 to 1990, I made visits in connection with Albanian ministry to different countries, to Austria and Greece, Montenegro, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, Macedonia, and of course Kosovo. And you can read about some of those visits in one or other of the books I have written about the Albanian work. In 1984, Edwin and Dorothy Jakes attended the annual prayer conference held at Cloverley Hall that year. Edwin and Dorothy were missionaries in Kortrijk from 1932 till 1940. 1984, they stayed in our home and they attended the prayer conference and spoke at the prayer conference, and a recording is available of one of Edwin Jakes' talks about the work there. Now an unexpected door opened. I was approached by Open Doors. Would I serve as an area rep for Open Doors, founded by Brother Andrew? And I said I would, but I said I only know about Albania, so I will only talk about the Albanian work. I won't talk about Open Doors work generally, because I'm not well enough informed. And that was accepted, and so I began to go around quite a large area, Wales, Cheshire, Shropshire, I don't remember all the places now, talking about the work of Open Doors, or at least talking about the situation in Albania, which Open Doors was making known. And once or twice I did a longer itinerary for them, one, for example, down to Essex. More significant events, there are special years, 1986, more significant events came along. In February, I was formally rejected from working with the European Christian Mission, and there is the letter from their British director telling me that they had no place for me at present. Now, I'd offered to work for them, and I didn't do anything else about forming another mission until they had responded. But now I felt free in my conscience to do whatever might come to pass. So in April, 4 of us met in that house in Guildford, and we formed what later became the Albanian Evangelical Mission. But to start with, we called it the Albanian Evangelical Trust. It was changed to Mission later on with permission from Edwin Jakes, who of course had that title before the war, not he himself, but the mission he worked with. And we wanted to emphasize our connection with him. He had given us his blessing in forming this mission, and so later on we changed the name to Mission. It was more appropriate anyway as the situation opened up. But it was founded in April 1986. Now, I was school teaching, and the school phased out German. The school was getting into financial problems, so it didn't have enough money to pay me full-time to teach French and German. So I did 1 year of part-time teaching in French. But in November 1986, I was formally commissioned to serve in the Albanian work. The service was conducted by the Reverend David Wynne, who was pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Mold, and the church formally set me aside for work in the Albanian ministry. The mission's first missionary was Mike Brown from Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Swansea. He went in 1989, couldn't go, of course, at that stage to Albania, so he went to Kosovo and settled in Pristina. And then at last, in June 1990, thanks to Edwin Jakes effecting the contact, we received our first letter from one of the remaining evangelical believers in Korča, and this letter is from Llay. In 1991, the regime fell, the communist regime, and religious freedom came to Albania. You could go in. And I remember Riona Peterson in one of her talks quoting this verse of scripture regarding Albania back in the 1970s. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. And there is another camper van belonging to a man called Andrew Fowler, and he and I filled it up with aid and drove out to Albania. And here we are, just approaching the border. We're very close to a village in Greece called Kristalopi, and we're on the way to Korča. My formal employment ended in December 2011, and here I am in November speaking at a large meeting in Pristina, which was even on television and in the newspaper, promoting a book I'd written about the history of the evangelical movement among Albanians. After my years, I retired on Christmas Day. That's because Christmas Day is my birthday. 2011, and that gentleman there standing at the site of the new church in Pristina before it was built, Paul Davis, he became the director in my place. Now, the call came to me to serve Christ when I was a schoolboy, and the call to serve Christ came to my wife when she was a schoolgirl. Never despise the call of God to the young. And Jesus said to them, follow me. There is also not only a call, but also a promise. Here we are, 2011. Looking back, we can confirm this promise. I will instruct you and teach you the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you.